Now, when the hurricane struck, something very significant happened. A side effect of President Bush and his administration not responding, not sending the troops in to help in this time of natural disaster, was that, well, the corporate media did the right thing. They simply went to New Orleans, and there were no troops to embed with. And we saw something remarkable. We saw something very raw. We saw unembedded, unspun reporting. Bodies floating by. One of the first demands of the Bush administration was, you will not show the bodies. To which the editor of the Times-Picayune said, you've got to be kidding. I remember seeing a young CNN reporter. A man walks up out of the water holding his boy's hand. He said his wife's hand had just slipped out of his, and she told him, take care of the children. He turned around after talking to this reporter and walked off into the water with his boy in shock. And this young CNN reporter starts to cry. That's reporting from the victim's perspective, and it galvanized this country. We will never forget those images. Could you imagine if for just 1 week we saw those images in Iraq? We saw the babies dead on the ground. We saw the women with their legs blown off by cluster bombs from Iraq to Lebanon. We saw the soldiers dead and dying for just 1 week. Americans are a compassionate people. They would say, no, war is not the answer to conflict in the 21st century. But where are the images? And with the hundreds of channels we have in this country and means of getting information, it's almost reassuring to people. If you don't see the images, then maybe somehow it's not that bad. We have been in Iraq longer than the U.S. was involved in World War II. The casualty figures are astonishing. More than 4,000 U.S. soldiers have died. Tens of thousands have been critically wounded, medevaced out of Iraq. More than 1 million have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the estimates are now that perhaps 1/3 of them are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, coming back home. I encourage you to read Joe Stiglitz and Linda Bilmes, the Harvard economist and Nobel laureate economist's book, The $3 Trillion War. $3 trillion. That is the costs of war today and the costs of taking care of these soldiers, the lucky ones who have come home. Now, the stories are out there. They are simply not being reported. Democracy Now! Went down to Silver Spring, Maryland a few weeks ago, to the National Labor College, to the most remarkable gathering of active duty soldiers and veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who'd come to tell their own stories, talk about atrocities they themselves had committed in Iraq. You couldn't get a story closer to the heart of what is happening in this country. At Democracy Now! We thought we're going to have to get there early. We have to set up everything in advance because all the media is going to be there. You know, these young men and women have the videotape. They've got the photographs. They tell the first-hand accounts of what was happening. This rarely happens in this country. But we had nothing to worry about when it came to having space to report and talking to the soldiers and vets who were there. That's right. There was almost no corporate media in the room. The Washington Post did a story that appeared in the Metro section of their paper. Where were the other papers? Where were the networks? And the stories were frightening. The stories told by the young men and women themselves or their parents, like the Lucys, who lost their son Jeffrey. He went to Iraq. He made it back. And for the next year, they watched his personality disintegrate until he was wearing full camo, his full military uniform to go out and buy beer in the street. And as they begged the Veterans Administration to take their boy in, the grandfather taking his grandson right to the step of the VA hospital, they realized they were losing their son. On one evening, Jeffrey asked his father, this young man of 23 or 24 years old, asked his father if he could curl up in his lap. His father rocked him silently for 45 minutes. The next day, his dad came home from work, called for Jeffrey. He didn't respond. He saw the door open to the basement, walked down, and there was his son hanging from the pipes. It was the last time he cradled his son, Jeffrey. These were the stories that should have been broadcast all over this country, because this is the real cost of war.